Welcome to the next presentation sponsored by the Parish Spiritual Life Group. Tonight's speaker is Stephen Schwarz, a familiar face here at both Christ the King and the university communities. Although Steve has only officially been a parishioner here at Christ the King for about 10 years, our records say around 2005, he's been working, living, and worshiping among us for over 50 years. Steve was a professor of philosophy at URI for 44 of those years, from 1963 to 2007, including the winner of a Teacher of Excellence Award in 1971. He's also the author of 2 philosophy books. Steve continues to be active, holding sessions in the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at URI, better known as the OLLI program. In addition to a fascinating family history of his journey to Rhode Island and URI, Steve has quite a personal story and history of living and growing and sustaining his faith. A frequent attender at daily Mass and currently serving some years as a lector for our parish community, among the other things that he does, keep him busy every day. Professor Schwarz keeps his faith alive and vibrant in many ways. And so, Steve, we thank you for joining us this evening and sharing some of that story.
Thank you, Christ the King, for inviting me, and thank you, Kiki. I want to introduce Kiki Latimer, who is my dear, dear friend. Always at the count, and this is not an exaggeration, without whom this would never have happened. And so I want to thank her very much, and I want to thank you for coming. A word of warning, this is the first time I'm doing PowerPoint. I used to do it the old-fashioned way, with overheads and passing out the photographs, and Kiki said, no more. Welcome to the 21st century. We're going to do PowerPoint. So we did a dry run Friday, and I messed up good for the first round. I didn't look at the screen at all. I'm not used to looking at that screen. I want to look at the people. So I have to get used to looking at that screen. I'd much rather look at each of you. I'm a person. So if I mess up on the overhead, either I don't look at it, or I'm ahead or behind, please bear with me. It's not one of my areas of specialization. Okay. I want to celebrate with you a life richly blessed by God, and blessed by a number of people, several people. Some of them will be known to you, some of them unknown. Some touched our lives very briefly, some touched it for a longer time. 3 of those are included in a handout that I will announce a little bit later. And then there's 2 others that are not included in a handout. So let me start. You all have the handout called Overview and Important Historical Dates. Is there anyone who doesn't have it? Do I have any more, Jen? Are there more over there?
There are not, we'll make copies.
The
How many people still need a copy of this?
Thank you again for coming. I thought I made enough copies with 130. I thought I was making too many, but apparently I underscored. So my apologies. Anyway, the overview, as you can see, indicates that the talk is divided into 5 parts, and then below that are some historical dates, and then at the end we'll have questions. So the first part is my mother and father. First, my mother, born in 1897 in Munich, Germany, agnostic Jewish family. She was a nurse, and one of the tests for nursing was an interview with a Dr. Röntgen. And maybe you're not familiar with Dr. Röntgen. If you are in Europe, then you would know that Röntgens are X-rays. They call them Röntgen. We call them X-rays. Dr. Röntgen was the inventor of X-rays. So that's one famous person that touched our lives. So she had an interview with Dr. Röntgen as part of her exam. There's another person. Oh, see, I've already done it. I've already messed up because I'm so engrossed by all of you. I hope that love, was it love overcome comes a multitude of sins.
We'll blame it all on Kiki.
No, I'm not blaming it on Kiki. Anyway, as could be predicted that I will overlook this. Anyway, that is the mother of my mother, who met a very tragic end on her way to a concentration camp. She either died on the way to the camp or in the camp. She's Jewish, or target for the Nazis. My mother's father was a doctor, and as I said, Dr. Röntgen was one of the examiners for my mother, and he was a friend and colleague of my father. My mother had an uncle, brother of my father, and this uncle was a close friend, fasten seatbelts, Einstein. Yes, Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein and the uncle of my father, of my mother's father. Einstein and the uncle of my mother's father were the same generation, and they were close friends. Einstein loved to sail on sailboats, and some years ago there was an article in the Narragansett Times on Einstein. Showed a picture of him, and he's sailing on the sailboats off of Newport, and it said Einstein loved sailing. And I read that article and I said, yeah, you got it right. I knew that already. I knew that from my mother. So Einstein would go sailing with Michael Katzenstein, uncle of my mother. And one day, the uncle asked Einstein, you know, I have a niece, teenage girl, Lady Katzenstein. She would love to meet you. Would it be okay if on one of our journeys to the lakes near Berlin, if she came along? Oh, yes, absolutely. So my mother was invited, and she met Einstein. And her report is glowing. Now, here's the most famous scientist alive at the time, and one of the most important scientists of all times. When you met him, he was a simple person like your friendly neighbor. It didn't get into his head. He was charming, loving. And there was an interesting thing about him. On the boat, they had a little stove to make hot water for the tea. And one day, the stove didn't work. And somebody said, oh, no problem. We have the world's greatest physicist on board. He'll fix the stove. Albert, come on. We need you. The stove isn't working. So Albert comes, looks at the stove, I don't know. Fix it. Theory. It's like asking a physicist, a theoretical physicist, to fix your car. Probably can't do it. You're a mechanic who doesn't have a PhD from MIT. He can do it. So it's an interesting observation. Anyway, I can't say enough good about Einstein as a simple, wonderful person. Einstein will come back later. I've got to go a little faster here, or else we'll be here all night. Anyway, my father. My mother was from the southern part of Germany, grew up agnostic Jewish. My father, from the northern part of Germany, grew up in a Catholic family. However, his own father was anti-Semitic, which you feel like that doesn't really go together. How can you be Catholic and how can you be Christian? For that matter, how can you even be human and anti-Semitic? But he was, because anti-Semitism was in the air. Somewhat like racism was in the air in the 20s. Ty Cobb was a racist. Well, he wasn't specifically a racist. They were all racists. Not all, but a lot of them were. It was in the air. And so when my father met my mother and wanted to marry her, his father said, no, you can't marry a Jewish person. And my father said, no, I'm going to marry her. He resisted on several grounds, on several levels. One, I don't know which one to make first, they're all kind of the most important. It's my decision, not yours. And second, you shouldn't be anti-Semitic. And he enlisted his friend, I'm going to go back a moment, Dietrich von Hildebrand, who was his teacher and friend. He had gone to I'm going to backtrack a little bit and go back to my grandfather. Went to the University of Munich and kind of didn't know where he wanted to go, and met von Hildebrand and found there the person that he wanted to follow. And von Hildebrand, a great anti-Nazi, and I'll show it right now, my battle against Hitler. I'll mention that a little bit more later. I don't want to break the continuity right now, but one of the major things about von Hildebrand was his seeing the evil of Nazism and fighting it. And this book is recently published, which indicates his works. Okay, where are we? Yeah, I have completely forgotten all of this. Okay, where are we? What pictures have I not paid attention to. Okay, is this the second picture? Okay, so first we had my mother's mother, and this is my father's mother. And that is a picture of my father and his father. We got that? No, that's my father as a little boy. Okay, then we got another one. Yeah, he's a nice guy. And he was, after he lost the fight, I gotta say that as an honor. After he lost the fight to try to prevent the marriage, he embraced my mother. So he was a good loser. After he lost, he said, fine, you win. And how could you, if you knew my mother, and you remember, my children are here, they remember, she was the most lovable person. And I guess it cured his anti-Semitism. I'd like to think that. I'd like to think that when you meet a really wonderful person, your anti-Semitism or racism, whatever it is, gets cured. In any case, he embraced her, and then he was the nicest grandfather to me. Okay, let's see Dietrich von Hildebrand, who was partly my father's savior in that struggle for my mother. So my mother and father, they met in Munich in 1926, married in 1929. I'm sorry, in 1929 my mother is baptized Roman Catholic. As I say, she was born agnostic Jewish, and September 6, 31, they're married in Munich. So now we go to part 2. Covers period 1932 to 1938. Okay, that's where I was born. It's also where my mother was born. Have I lost any of the pictures? How about Patty? About 200? Trying to get up to about 300. 310? Okay. I'm trying to get up to 400. Okay, there we have Munich, where my mother was born. Let's go back to the map a moment. Munich, where my mother and I were born, and up there, Hanover. Above Münster, that's the big type, that's Hanover, that's where my father's from. Okay, then we go to the next picture, that's Munich. Is that right? Yeah, that's Munich, where my mother and I were born. I was born there November 8th, 1932. January 30th, Hitler comes to power. Big event. Dark clouds over Germany. In the spring of 1933, my father and mother went up to Münster. That was also on the previous sheet. You may remember the map of Münster. Yeah, there is Münster. He taught at a college up there in Münster. And one of his colleagues, here's another big name, or at least for Catholics, not then, but now, Saint Edith Stein was then a professor of philosophy at the University of Münster with my father. So he was a colleague of Edith Stein. But more than that, they became friends. And he invited Edith Stein to their house, and she used to come about once a week, and they would have serious discussions in my father's library. They would discuss the faith. He was a recent convert to the faith. They would discuss the faith. They would discuss philosophy, because they both were interested in philosophy, and they discussed the political situation. And I think I know how that conversation went. Gee, it's terrible. It's terrible. Hitler's in power. So many people don't realize what's going on. That was one of the big things. Not just that the Nazis were in power, but people thought that not a big deal. You know, I know government's corrupt. And I want to point out in a moment that this is not just a matter of a corrupt government. Okay, that's all over the place. Rhode Island and elsewhere. That's not what it is. It's not what it is. However, I'm coming out of the punchline. Before the serious discussion, let me just finish that. It's terrible, we got to do something. What are we going to do? Very hard to do anything. You didn't have the kind of free speech that we had, freedom of the press, write a letter to the editor. You could get in big trouble by writing the wrong letter to the editor. But before those serious discussions, Edith Stein, ring the doorbell. Before the library and the serious discussion, remember now, I was born that previous November. We're now in spring of 1933, so keep that in mind. Before the serious discussion, Edith Stein would say, I want to go to the baby room. And she would pick up the little baby, hold the little baby in her arms. And that baby is no longer a baby. That summer, my parents went to Hanover with my father's parents and decided to leave Germany. And that's Hanover. Okay. Why did they leave Germany? Intrinsic evil of Nazism. And we're going to get the 5 points, or one of them at a time, or maybe all 5, and then are we doing this in detail now, or we'll do that later in detail? Later. In detail later. Okay, there's 5 points. So I'll mention just briefly, and then we'll do them in more detail later, and they're also on a handout. Okay, the first one is anti-Semitism. Okay, Hitler picked up on the latent anti-Semitism that was already known to you because of my grandfather. Extreme nationalism, not just patriotism, but nationalism. Our country is the only country that counts. All the other countries don't count. You can be patriotic and still love other countries. You can say, I'm an American, I'm proud to be an American, and I love traveling in Europe, in France, Italy, and Spain. You know, you can be open to other cultures. Number 3, radical militarism. I mean, maybe you need a military for self-defense, but they made a glory of it. And number 4, radical collectivism. The individual doesn't count. It's the state that's the only important thing. And number 5, which kind of sums it up, totalitarianism. Not just an authoritarian government, but totalitarianism which rules every part of your life. That's why they left Germany. Not because of a corrupt government, but because of those things. So, 1933 to 1934, Fribourg in Switzerland. Okay, and then we go to Salzburg. You can keep that, because we go to Salzburg after that. Salzburg, we live in a castle, Freisaal. That's probably known, that's Salzburg, yeah, that's this town of Salzburg, which you may recognize from Sound of Music. And we lived in this little castle, a real castle, yeah. A castle with a moat around it, except they built a bridge. But in the old days, they didn't have a bridge. They had the moat to keep the enemies out. Now they had a bridge. And we lived there. And one of our neighbors, a little far away, but maybe 2 or 3 miles away, were the Von Trapps, the original Von Trapps. Okay, not Julie Andrews. And either my parents were invited at their house, or they invited Maria and her husband, Captain, to our house, and it was time for me to go to bed. And what happens? Maria Von Trapp sings me a lullaby. Okay, then we go to Fribourg. Well, then there's the Von Trapps, and we go to Fribourg, which is near Bern in Switzerland. And I go to kindergarten, and there's a letter from Einstein. Is that coming up, that letter? From Einstein to my mother? Not yet. Oh yeah, we live in that castle. We live in that mansion. And that's a little story too. That mansion was reputed to be a haunted house. So nobody wanted to live there. We got it dirt cheap. We lived in a haunted house. Oh, we're living there. You know, my parents asked, we'd like to, how about that house? Oh, no, you don't want to do that. It's a haunted house. So we'll take it. And they explored. Why do people think it's haunted? And went upstairs to the attic, and there was kind of an opening where the wind came in. Ooh! Oh, that's why it was haunted. But we survived the haunted. Teacher from Hildebrand, and again, I'll go to him later. He was haunted by, oh yeah, that's my father and son, Father and Stephen, from around that time. That's my mother and me. I think you can see from that picture what a loving person she is. And you can sort of imagine, and it's hard to put yourself in the position of someone who's anti-Semitic, but try. If you're anti-Semitic and you see that woman there, oh my God, no. Give it up. So my mother melted his heart. Anyway, that's my mother. That's von Hildebrand. Dietrich von Hildebrand, a young Dietrich von Hildebrand with an even younger Stephen Schwarz, from around that time. Probably in Switzerland. He was on his way from, that's also me, he was on his way from Vienna, escaping one step ahead of the Nazis, because the Nazis recognized him as an enemy. He was on their hit list. We've got to get this von Hildebrand. He's causing trouble for our cause. And indeed he was. They were absolutely right. He was causing trouble for their cause. Okay, that's me from around that time. And then that's also me from around that time. Von Hildebrand to visit. And now we go to part 3. Oh, there's the letter from Einstein. This is me. Oh, there's the German letter. Okay, how's it? Frau Leni Schwarz, happens to be my birthday, November. Yeah. Frau Leni Schwarz, Freudville, that's where we lived, that was the haunted house. Schweiz is the German for Switzerland. And sehr geehrte Frau Schwarz, and I'll read it in English. In the same mail, I'm sending a letter from Professor Lippmann, a copy of which I enclose. Perhaps for the use of this letter, in hope of everything will soon be in order, I remain with friendly greetings, your A. Einstein. It's signed. It comes out better in the German part. He was at Princeton at that time. Okay, so he trying to help us out. I don't know if anything ever came of this, but here's the letter. Okay, so part 3 now. We move to France, to Limoges. This is going to be a longer part 3 with quite a few episodes. First, we're in Limoges, a fairly large city. Limoges, I do my first Holy Communion, visit to Lourdes. Hitler invades Poland. December 24th, 1939, my father joins the French army. How do you figure that? He's German. The French are fighting the Germans, and he's going to fight with the French against the Germans? How do you figure that? It's not a fight between French and Germans. It's a fight between humanity and anti-humanity, between the enemies of humanity. So you join any group that will fight the Nazis. It's the Nazis that we're fighting, not the Germans. They were Germans, but the important thing is that they were the Nazis. And maybe the individual soldiers weren't all Nazis. They probably weren't. They were drafted into the army. So they weren't individually Nazis, but they were fighting the cause of the Nazis. So in that sense, he was fighting the Nazis. So he joined the French army, which was a noble thing to do. He said, this is my battle. I can't sit back and just let the other people fight. I've got to join. So he joined the French army, which is going to have consequences. Okay, we're in, see now page 6, I lost page 6 here. Okay, all right, now we get to some incidents. My father in the French army, he is stationed in the north of France, in a place near Solesmes, which is an important Benedictine monastery. He was a Benedictine oblate. He loved the Benedictine way of life. He loved the Gregorian chant. And so in his off times, when he was off on a furlough or a leave, he would go to the monastery. Other soldiers went elsewhere. I don't have to tell you where they went. They went, and my father chose not to go to those kind of places. He went instead to the monastery, and he joined the monks with their singing beautiful Gregorian chant. And so he kind of found a home there, a home away from home, away from the dreariness of the battle, of the war. Actually, they weren't fighting very much. The Germans were still quite a distance ahead, but it was still a dreary existence with people that you don't relate to that well. So anyway, he has a home in Solesmes. Hitler invades Holland and Belgium in May 1940. We're in 1940. In June, the French army collapses. They just weren't that good a fighting force. And the Nazis, you gotta give them credit for that. They were good fighters, and they overran Europe. And then something terrible happened. His commanding officer deserted his troops. That's one of the worst things that an officer can do. He got into his jeep with 2 or 3 of his buddies, and he said to the rest of them, you guys are on your own. Good luck. See you later. In fact, he didn't mean see you later. You know? Why? You're on your own. Take care of yourself. So my father was left with a group of other people. Well, at least he was with a group of other people. They were in a car, and they were driving along, and the driver said, you know, I've been driving, I've been up 24 hours. I am dead tired. So I got to pull over and rest. And my father was tired also. So he also rested, got into a ditch, and fell asleep. And all he remembers is at one point in this deep, deep sleep, you know how you can be in a deep, deep sleep, and suddenly something wakes you up? Headlights cross his field of vision, and the car's gone with his knapsack in it. So he's all alone with nothing. He walks along, he finds a farm where they're celebrating First Holy Communion of one of their children, and they invite him in. But you know, it doesn't last. They don't invite him to stay. And so here he is, all by himself. He's got an ID card, said born in Germany, origine d'Allemagne, born in Germany. He's walking along, walking towards the south, but he's way up there, like, put it in perspective, like he's in mid-New Hampshire, maybe northern New Hampshire, and you're going to walk back to Rhode Island. Good luck. Or maybe he's in Maine. I don't know. I projected it on the map, but something. He's not in Providence. Further than that. He's walking all alone. The Germans are mechanized. They have tanks and trucks. They are meeting no resistance. It's only a matter of time before the Germans will catch up with him. With this lonely man walking there. Look, who are you? Let's see your ID card. Oh, origine d'Allemagne. You were fighting with the French? Boom. Lucky if they just killed him on the spot. They might have taken him back to a camp, torture, concentration camp. You don't want that to happen. So, what's he going to do? He cannot walk faster. I mean, let's go back to Franconia Knox, New Hampshire. You're up in New Hampshire. And the Germans, they're not in Canada. They're a little bit further north, 20 miles further north. They've already come down from Canada. They're a little further north. They're going to catch up with you. You're not going to walk and escape them by walking. What do you do? Now here's where the audience comes in. Put yourself in my father's shoes. What are you going to do?
Steal a car.
What?
Steal a car.
Steal a car? Oh no, there's no car to be stolen. So you're going to have the keys. With a car. That's right. You couldn't do that. There's one other thing that you could do. Anybody? Yeah?
Get rid of all your French evidence?
No, go to the monastery.
Yeah.
Go to the monastery. There. Obvious thing to do. You go to Salem and you tell them, this is my situation. Could you pull me up? Could you, give me a robe, Benedictine robe, and I will join you in the prayers. I'll say the prayers with you, and the Germans can just walk over it. You never know that this is a different kind of monk. And don't worry, I'll help in the kitchen, I'll peel potatoes and wash dishes. Everything will be fine. So he was about to do that. That's the obvious thing to do. On his way to Salem, he sees a French officer getting into his jeep and heading towards the German lines. And spontaneously, he leaps up and says, wait a minute, you're going the wrong way. Okay? Pretend the Germans are coming from up north, from Providence. Okay? I don't know why I took Providence in that, but anyway. So the Germans are coming from up north, heading that way. He says, you don't want to go that way, you want to go this way. And the officer jumps out and says, who are you? You're causing trouble here. No, I'm just trying to be helpful. Let's see your paper. Oh, Dorothy Delmont, you're born in Germany. You're a German spy. No, I'm not a German spy. If I were a German spy, I wouldn't have, spies don't have German spy written on their lapel or in their ID card. He wasn't buying it. He took out his gun, put it in my father's side, and was about to pull the trigger. Wait. We're having an argument here. We can't seem to settle it. I can't convince you that I'm not a spy. You know what I am? I'm a philosophy professor. You know what philosophy is? It's got to be the most harmless thing from a military point of view. I'm a philosophy professor. I'm not even supposed to be a soldier. But I'm not a spy. I know you're a spy. That's why you try to mess me up, this German ID card. Look, we can't seem to settle it. Let's go to your commanding officer and let him settle the dispute. Fine, because I know he'll take my side. Well, they went to the commanding officer who had somewhat greater intelligence than this officer, and he realized my father was a harmless professor. The last thing that you want to call him is a spy. You're okay, and you're going to get lost there. And he asked my father, we're still an intact unit. We're heading south. You want to come along? Yeah, sure, hop in. So they went south, across that big river in northern France, 2/3 of the way from France, the Loire, very, very big river, very broad river. Blew up the bridges afterwards, and my father came further and further south, and we got to catch up a little bit where my mother and I, we kind of lost them and got to get back to them. And so he made his way through this company to a point further south. He got in touch with my mother, and then we were reunited. But we got to put that on hold for now, because we got to finish the Salem story. I've only told you half of it. It's the half that takes much longer. But in terms of significance, the other half is just as significant, maybe more. Because you want to ask the question, maybe some of you are wondering about this. You should wonder about it. What would have happened if he had gone to Salem? He wouldn't be alive today, and I wouldn't be here today, and my daughter wouldn't be here, and my daughter wouldn't be here, and my granddaughter wouldn't be here. Because, unknown to him, the Germans had already occupied Salem. My father took a tour of France in 1950, and we were in northern France, and my father said, let's go by Salem. Let's go by the areas where I served as a soldier. I want to relive that. So I remember going by Salem. Salem, the monastery, we ever been there, Salem? I do go there once in a while. Salem is in a little village, tiny little village, much smaller than Peacedale, smaller than Kingston, quarter the size of Kingston. But it's strategically located, like 6 roads come together, so it was a strategic spot. The Germans had already occupied Solem, he would have walked right into the German trap and would have been either killed instantly or sent back to Germany to die there. Never reunited with my mother. I don't think my mother could have gotten us out of there. It was my father who got the job. That's anticipating of it. So, they are through God's grace. Lainey and Stephen are in Limoges, so we're going to backtrack a little bit. This is while my father's in the army. As a result of the invasion of Holland and Belgium, streams of refugees come down. In June of 1940, Paris falls to the Nazis. My mother is advised to leave Limoges. It's getting too dangerous. Nazis are too close. So the word came that let's take what we can carry on our backs, and we hitchhike go to Brive. So we did. We got one ride and then got left on the side of the road. And around midnight, it was raining. Suddenly a truck with milk cans in the back came. Are you going to Brive? Yeah, that's exactly where we were going. Want to ride? Yeah. So somebody mentioned hitchhiking, so we did that. So we went to Brive, and there Edmond Michelet welcomed us. There's Edmond Michelet, whom I will talk about later. One of the great heroes of that time. A wonderful, saintly man. In fact, his cause for canonization is up. He saved thousands of refugees who came down from northern France and the Low Countries, and some Germans too. This is Edmond Michelet with his wife and one of his children. So Edmond Michelet welcomed us and told us that even Brive was not safe. So my mother and I went still further. This is fleeing from the Nazis. That's in the flyer that I gave some of you. So we go to Toulouse, which is the southern part of France. You see it there, the arrow, Toulouse. But when we're in Toulouse, my father sends word, he's safe, he's back. My mother didn't know what my father was doing. I mean, there were no cell phones. There weren't any kind of phones. My mother didn't know whether my father had survived the war. I mean, that was not to be taken for granted. And you know how close he came to not survive if he had not met that soldier who wanted to go to the German lines, if he had ended up in Solem. Or if he didn't have Solem. Suppose there was no Solem, and he had just kept walking. He wouldn't have made it then either. So, if you're looking ahead of time, the probability of my father making it, not very good. I wouldn't put my money on my father making it. Not good odds. But he did make it. Thank God. Thank God. Anyway, my mother then went back, even though the Limoges was a little bit different, and my father went to every train, and then we were reunited, but there was a German commission in Limoges, so we went back to Brive. So in Brive, and then Limoges, and then back to Brive, and Michelet took us into his own home, and you saw that home. He took us into his own home. I mean, it's all about generosity. You sometimes give up on human nature when you see man's inhumanity to man, and the greed, and the corruption, and the egotism and stuff. And then you see someone like Michelet, who offers his own home to these poor German refugees. That's what he did. And he then found us a place to live in Brive, Beauregard. At that time, we dropped our name. Schwarz is a very German name. We looked in the dictionary, it means black, Schwarz. And so that labels us as German. And the French people couldn't distinguish, or it didn't at least, between Nazi and German. And sometimes people fall into that. Americans can fall into that too. All the Russians are communists. No, they're not. Not all the Nazis are German. Some of the anti-Nazis are German. And not all Germans are Nazis, and I'm afraid not all Nazis are German either. So anyway, we lived in this house called Beauregard. We dropped the name Schwarz, and we adopted Thomas, which is not specifically any particular country. And in French, that's Thomas, which is going to be significant, as you'll see in a moment. So we live in this house, Beauregard, and the people there are very nice. I start third grade, but the kids taught me, tomate, coming tomato. Hi, tomato. And my parents were afraid that I would spill the beans and say, you know what, my name isn't Tomato, it's Schwarz. It's what? It's like, your name is O'Reilly, and you don't want to pass for Irish? Good luck. Oh, O'Reilly, well, you're Irish. Caminiti, you're Italian. Schwarz, you're German. So my parents took me out of the school. My father homeschooled me. So I lost the third grade. So I lost the grade, not because I, flunked out because it was just too dangerous to go to school. So my father homeschooled me. Okay, December of 1940, two very important letters, one from the Rockefeller Foundation. There's Mr. Rockefeller. Thank you, Mr. Rockefeller, from the foundation. A Rockefeller grant to pay us for the trip to the United States, and Mother Damon, Mother Grace Damon, offering a job, sight unseen, on the basis of a friend of my father, Valdemar Gurian, who left Germany even earlier, saw the horror of the Nazis even earlier than my father, and was teaching at Manhattanville College, which then was in uptown Manhattan, is now just outside of New York, near White Plains and Purchase, New York. Then all girls, now it's co-ed. And she was the president, and she said, I'll give him a job. Sight unseen, I'll take your word for it. So my father had the grant and the job. The Rockefeller money arrived. Now here's the problem. It's in American dollars, and the ticket is in French francs. Not so easy to get the official change. And somebody says, you know, I know Joe Smith there, he'll change it for you. So they introduced him to this Joe Smith, that was his name, we call him that. And he's kind of a sinister-looking guy. And my father, if I give this guy my money, I gotta do it. So he gives him the money. And I says, yeah, I'll see you tomorrow. I'm gonna go change it, I'll see you tomorrow. And this guy's gonna walk away with the money. I'm never gonna see it again. No. Give me my money back. All right, what's your money back? Here. Here's your money back. Oh, maybe he's honest after all. Because he could have just kept going. What money? What are you talking about? What could my father do? I mean, he was younger, strong guy. My father couldn't wrestle him to the ground and get his money back. So when the guy turned around and says, you want your money back? Here's your money back. Oh, he's honest after all. Okay. Change it. I'll see you tomorrow. And sure enough, he came. Change it. We got our tickets. Okay, May 6th, we leave, breathe. And now we go to part 4 in your handout. Journey to America. May 6th, now we're in 1941 now. 1941. May 6th, 1941, we leave Breed at 6 in the morning. Michelet comes to see us off. One last touchdown. So, 6 o'clock in the morning, who's going to get up at that hour to see your friends? But he did. That's the kind of person Michelet is. If you start losing your faith in human nature, think of Michelet. There are people like that. There are people like that. So we take the train to Marseille. Our ship is the Winnipeg, converted freighter run by the Vichy government. Now, a little history. The Vichy government was stationed, that's the Winnipeg. We're not among these people, but we might all understand it. The Vichy government was the French government in the unoccupied part of France, and very heavily criticized by French patriots and by the English and the Dutch and others for compromising with the Nazis. Now, maybe the criticisms were justified, maybe not. Maybe they, tried to make the best of a bad situation. In any case, the Vichy government was on the outs with the Allies, which is going to be significant. Okay, there's the Winnipeg. It's a converted freighter, and it's headed for Martinique, but on the way we go to Tunis and Casablanca, and make short stops in Africa, and I take a little stroll on the streets in Tunis. It's bound for Martinique in the French West Indies. We were supposed to, we were shown the hold of the ship. It's about the size of this room here, maybe even bigger. And there were not two, usually in camps, you have 2 bunks. There were like 8 bunks, one on top of the other, one right next to the other. No ventilation. We didn't want to sleep there, so we slept on the deck. And the journey moves along pretty smoothly. And finally, the night comes when the next morning, early in the morning, we're scheduled to arrive in Martinique, a French colony in the West Indies. I still remember that night, that early morning, awakening to a loud, tremendously loud noise, like a thunder loud noise, the noise of a cannon from a cruiser. You awaken suddenly, and you look up. Our ship stopped. There's a warship next to us. What's going on? There's Martinique just ahead, but our ship is stopped, and there's this warship next to us. And the captain of that warship comes down, and goes in a little boat, comes to our ship. Our captain comes down from the bridge, gets out his papers, and the captain looks them over, and like a state trooper, pulls you over, license, registration. What's going on? What's going on? We don't know. What we know is that we don't head into the port of Martinique, but we head south. We head directly south, and there's this warship next to us, accompanying us. What's going on? What's going on? Eventually we found out. That warship was a Dutch cruiser in the service of the English. And the mission was to round up all the Vichy government ships, because the Vichy government, rightly or wrongly, and you can read your history and make your own decision, rightly or wrongly, was on the outs with the English. So they didn't want these ships floating around. They wanted to capture them. What happened was that the Dutch cruisers sent a Morse code saying, stop. And the captain, remember, we're almost in Martinique. What do you do when you see the lights? You go for it, right? You try to outrun the state trooper? Not such a well, that's what he tried to do. He tried to outrun the state trooper. Not the state trooper, Dutch cruiser. And that's when the Dutch cruiser fired a shot in the air, which is what was my alarm clock that morning. And the next Morse code was, that's in the air. If you don't stop, the next one won't be in the air. It's going to be aimed at you and it's going to sink you. So you're not going to get to Martinique in any case. You either play ball, go with us, or you go to the bottom of the ocean. That's when the captain decided it was not such a good idea to try to outrun this ship. So we head south. We head south for Trinidad, which then was a British colony, now it's an independent country. And we put in a camp there. Everything's messed up. We're supposed to go to Martinique. Our papers read Martinique to New York. The boat was supposed to be from Martinique to New York. I got to start all over it. So my father calls Mother Damon, and you know what? A little detour here. We're in Trinidad. Huh? I went to Trinidad. Well, we didn't exactly go to Trinidad. We were escorted to Trinidad. We were invited to Trinidad. So things got shuffled around. And finally, after about 3 weeks, we were put on an American cruise liner, the Arcadia. And for us, it was a medium-level cruise liner. But for us, it was heavy. You have a 3-course breakfast, a choice of scrambled eggs and pancakes. We were used to that. We didn't starve, but we were used to that. And so we're heading for New York. How are we doing on time? Look, New York. Okay, we still got a ways to go. Because we're not finished with the adventures yet. We're heading for New York, Port of New York, and they have the people at Customs and Immigration, and look at our papers, and you get a stack of papers, visas and this and that. And my middle name is Dietrich, named after Dietrich von Hildebrand. He's my godfather. He helped me as a baby. So my name is Stephen Dietrich Schwarz. And so they wrote out the name in full. Stephen Dietrich Schwarz, Stephen Dietrich Schwarz, Stephen Dietrich Schwarz, in one place. You know, like 25 places your name appears. In one place it was only Stephen Dietrich. And so, what's this? Who's this Stephen Dietrich? Says to my mother, who's the Stephen Dietrich? That's my son. You just forgot the last name. Is this your son? Yeah, that's my son. I'm not be insulted. This is not your son. I'm doubting that this is my son. No, this isn't right. Ellis Island. Friday afternoon. No, they didn't want to deal with it. It was either a big deal or it was not a big deal, but it was not up to them to judge. Ellis Island, they'll straighten you out. So Friday afternoon, we're still in Trinidad. Ellis Island. Friday afternoon. Now, they're not going to do anything Friday afternoon. We're looking at the weekend in Ellis Island. And Monday morning, they'll get to us. Maybe not first thing even. Friday afternoon, Ellis Island. My father gets on the phone, Mother Dana. You won't believe this, but there's another delay. I mean, we are really tough customers here. We don't make it to Martinique. Now we end up in Ellis Island. Man, what's the matter with you guys? Don't worry. I'll take care of it. She calls one of the professors, Professor Mira, I don't remember his name, professor of mathematics. We got our first taste of it. It's not what you know, it's who you know. Works in New York too.
There you go.
Dr. Lara apparently was on a first-name basis with the head of Ellis Island. That's my understanding of it. So he went to Ellis Island. He said, come on, I want to see Joe. Right? And the head guy at Ellis Island, Joe, you're keeping this couple here and their little son, Baldur and Laney Schwarz. He's a professor at our college. He doesn't belong here. Can you let him go? Of course. If you say so, you vote for him. No problem. Oh, Schwarz is, yeah, come on. You're all safe. Don't worry. Get on the boat. Back to the main. So we were saved. But even that story has a sequel. The next morning, Saturday morning, my mother comes down with a pretty bad illness. She needs hospitalization and first-rate medical attention, which she probably wouldn't have gotten at Ellis Island. It may have cost her her life. That's horrifying to think that a little clerical error could lead to the death of a person. That's just terrible. Maybe it wouldn't have, but it was scary. Anyway, we survived that. We didn't have much money. My father got a salary of $2,000 a year, which is bad even for then. I mean, today we're completely out of the ballpark. But even then, they couldn't pay anymore. So my mother was a night nurse. I mentioned that she had studied to be a nurse earlier. She was a night nurse. And my father taught at Manhattanville College. And we live at 448 Central Park West. Okay, now we get to part 5, last part. Now, let's see quicker. Part 5. Okay, Baldur Mulaney in America. How should I do this? Read this off quickly? Yeah. So my father teaches philosophy at Manhattanville College. Oh wait, Mother Damon, affirmative. I got to include this. 20 years before the Civil Rights Movement, 20 years before Martin Luther King, Mother Damon, president of an upscale, both economically and scholastically, girls' college, went out and sought African American women, much to the chagrin of many of the parents, not all the parents, but many of them, heavily criticized. All white student body. We've got to reach out to everybody. Mother Damon, right here, another beautiful person that touched our lives. Okay, Mother Damon dies, and the new president fires all the professors who are not all the professors, and only the nuns get to teach, even though he had tenure. He goes to various other colleges, including one Seton Hill, because he was commuting to Staten Island. He figured out that going to Pittsburgh once a week was taking him less time than commuting to Staten Island. And then finally he gets what he wants. We've always wanted Fordham University with von Hildebrand. And my mother works as a nurse. And in the fall of '63, my father gets an invitation to go back to Europe. They had gotten invitations earlier, but to Germany, they didn't want to go back to Germany. But Sound of Music City. Can you imagine being invited to Sound of Music City? Yeah, that's pretty tempting. And to start a new program, and I was settled. They didn't want to go because I was still. I remember my father once asking me, "You want to go back to Germany?" I said, "No, please, no. I love it here. I love America. I'm finally settled here. So, let's not go back to Germany." And yeah, we don't want to go back to Germany. But in '63, I had just started teaching here. I was on my own, and my father and mother, hey, this kind of city, that beats here, Rochelle, New York. That beats the Bronx and Rochelle. So that's where they lived, in that part of that was their parish church. They lived in that house on the left side, along the vines, Tauchgasse, in the area of Salzburg, with a view of the mountains. And if you remember Sound of Music, you get some of those views there. Sound of Music was filmed in that area. Now I'll let you know a little secret. The house is 2 houses. Yeah. The first house, at the very beginning, when she comes with her guitar and dancing on the street, the house in the yellow, that's one house. The other house, where in the back there's water and she's in the boat, fooling around in the boat, and they fall in the water, that scene where she's with the kids and they all fall in the water, that's a different house. The first house doesn't have any water in the back of it. It's a plain there. The other house, Leopoldskron, like 2 minutes from Tauchgasse, from where you see that. Very, very close by. It's an actual lake. It's a little pond, very shallow pond. There's my mother and father around that time. My father teaching at the University of Salzburg. Let's see, where are we? We did that already. Okay. There's my father with Mary, my youngest, who's not here. 2 of my daughters are here, and I want to introduce you to them. That comes a little bit later. The youngest one is studying for a PhD. She's following after her grandfather and her father, studying for a PhD in University of Dallas. And that's her 10-year-old girl, my wife, and 3 girls who went to a tour of Europe in 1986. So that's in their house. That's my father meeting Pope Paul VI. So that's one of the people who touched our lives. My father was Pope Paul VI, and the person on the right is Lyman Stebbins, who is the founder of the Catholics United for the Faith. And they are welcomed by Pope Paul VI in 1968. And this is my father with Pope Paul II. So both those popes, he also knew Pius XII, both before he became Pope in the Luncius in Munich, way back in the 20s, and then later when he became Pope. This is my father and mother. My father, about a month before his death in 1993. I will tell that story in a moment. This is my mother. She has another year to live after that. This is my mother around this time, in 1993. My father. He was a philosopher. Many areas, including the history of philosophy, but also, toward the end of his life, he specialized on gratitude, both as a philosophical topic and also in his life. When he would welcome guests into his home, he would impress upon them the importance of gratitude and how gratitude is an antidote to complaining. We're all liable to complain. Traffic and the drivers are idiots. And this is going on. Be grateful. Look at the news. Look at the Syrian refugees who have only the things they can carry. Where do they sleep? Where do they eat? I can't get that into my head. You lose your home and you head out to sea, and many don't make it. Be grateful. You have a home. You have food. You have loved ones. Be grateful. Be grateful. And there's some fittingness that he died on Thanksgiving Day, 1993. I was up. I couldn't sleep. I can't sleep with the back. And I was up at 1 o'clock in the morning. The phone rings. The phone rings, and there's a woman's voice in German. This is a German woman in German. Ihr Vater ist gestorben. Your father just died. And then Mary, who was staying there, came out and realized something was going to give me a hug, comfort. It was very hard because I was very close to my father. My father's death was unexpected. My mother died a year later. I knew she wasn't going to live that much longer. She died at 97. She was 96 at that time. I had made plans to visit her. I was a sabbatical that following year, spring of 95, so I was going to visit her. Just after Christmas, 94, and I got a call. Don't wait a couple of days, come now. So I went there. I prayed the whole time that I would still see her alive. And I was told that she knew I was coming and held on. So I came left on a Monday, got there on a Tuesday, at the end of December, so Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Thursday night, the sisters at this wonderful home in Salzburg said that this is it. They could tell. There's something in the neck that was different just before I was there when she died. Morning to September 30th. December 30th, 94. Okay, we have Paul VI. We have that. Stephen in America. Okay, there's me. Okay. Stephen in America. That's another part of part 5. Summer 1941, my parents sent me to a camp to learn English. I didn't speak any English. Okay, I learned German at home. Okay, that was the first time. Then I learned French to get by in school, first in Limoges, and then starting in Brive, which still wants to learn French. So I spoke German, I spoke French, not a word of English. My father had to learn English over the summer and learn it well enough to teach. That's quite a challenge. I'll tell you, I wouldn't want to teach in German. I know German pretty well. I was sent to a camp. But the camp was in way upstate New York, just over the Canadian border. Everybody spoke French. So I spoke French all summer. When I came back, I didn't know any English. I went to Corpus Christi school, and one of the nuns took me out of the class and we played games. I still remember there was a puzzle of a ship. We did puzzles, we played cards, we probably played checkers and all kinds of games. I said, this is great. The other kids have to study. I get to play games. This is wonderful. I didn't realize she was giving me an English lesson. But she was a wise educator. She didn't say, okay, sit down, have an English lesson. Ready? Okay, ready. She broke the ice by saying, let's play a game. And apparently I did learn English. I would say after one semester I spoke it. All right, so then we spent, you're way up there already. So we spent one summer in Maine with had pictures, and then several summers in Vermont. Corpus Christi, I just went there. Then I went to boarding school for a while, and then I went to Fordham Prep, which is over here, and then later to Harvard. I was a TA under von Hildebrand. Then I got my PhD at Harvard. I'd been at Fordham 9 years, decided it was time for a change, and got accepted at Harvard, so I went there. And then in the year teaching, tried to write my dissertation, didn't work, gave up teaching, and then was almost finished with the dissertation and started URI full-time in fall of '63, and taught there until 2007. So now we get to the last part, the last part. June 3rd, a very short story about how I met my wife. I had a student, Joan Davis, and one day, and I kept going to New York to visit Hildebrand and others, and she said, okay, can I have a ride? I want to ride to New York. All right, I need you, but I can't, show you around. I'll just leave you off. I said, boy, I'm fine. So I took her to New York one time, and on the way back, she was on cloud 9. She had just met the most wonderful person, Jimmy. And he was an African American, and she loved him, and her father called and says, we got to stop this marriage. No, nothing doing. Anyway, after she got married, she said, marriage is wonderful. You ought to get married. And I met the right girl, I know somebody, Sherry Byrne. So she told me about Sherry Byrne, gave me her address. I wrote a letter to Sherry Byrne, and on December 1st, 1966, outside of Washburn Hall here, I met Sherry Byrne. And the rest, as I say, is history. Married a little bit later, it was the marriage ceremony. Right is Alice von Hildebrand, the wife, at that time wife, now widow of von Hildebrand. And then to the left of the candles is my father. And then obscured is the wife of one of his brothers, and then somebody else. We were married to Christ the King. We have 4 children, 2 of which are here. Can we introduce you? Steven. You are here. Elizabeth and Stephen, he's over there somewhere. Mary, you see. There. Elizabeth, Stephen, Margaret, Mary. That's the birth of Elizabeth. And that's Sherry, that's Mrs. von Hildebrand, that's von Hildebrand, Gideon von Hildebrand, that's my father, me, and then my mother. In 1969, just after the birth of Elizabeth. And this is them, and they were born, birth date's given there, and let's see what else. That's Sherry and John. That's grandson, Elizabeth's son, and that's Margaret with her 2 daughters. Here's a sad story. Elise, the younger daughter of Margaret, was born September 21st, 2002, died September 3, 2013. She had autoimmune disease. Put up a courageous fight for about half a year, 3/4 of a year at the Hasbro Intensive Care Unit, and we visited her several times, but finally succumbed to that illness. That's Elise, I think it's her first Holy Communion. Woman God, but try to be grateful. Okay, I think the intrinsic evil of Nazism, and that has, the anti-Semitism, from von Hildebrand. There are two forms of it. One downplays the Jews, degrades the Jews, they're not much different from animals. And interestingly enough, racism against blacks does the same thing, claims that they're a lower form of being. And the other is kind of the opposite, thinks that they're cheaters, and get in the way and destroy the culture. Extreme nationalism. A true patriot who loves his country more than others, but not despise others. Just like you love your family, but you don't hate other people. So a patriot loves his country, but doesn't hate other people, and sees the good in others, sees where he can learn from others. We can learn from other cultures. There's a true multiculturalism. There's some bad ones too. There's a valid multiculturalism. We learn from other cultures when they can teach us something. Extreme nationalism also downplays the individual as being a part of the greater whole, but that's actually also in radical collectivism. There's extreme militarism. Radical militarism, glorification of the military as an end in itself. That's Hitler. He was big on that. But that's actually part of the German tradition. And then the next one is radical collectivism. The dignity and value of the importance of the individual is downplayed, sacrificed. Radical anti-personalism, and the logical outcome is the trampling on individual rights, which ultimately leads to the gas chambers. Kind of a logical sequence there. And in some ways it's totally counterintuitive, but if you follow the evil of Nazism and the anti-Semitism, the nationalism, the collectivism, you follow it through, that's what it means. Radical collectivism, the individual, that's the core reason for the absolute intrinsic evil of Nazism, it brings together and sums up the others, makes the state absolute. The state has a role, it's not absolute. Every detail and aspect of the individual's life comes under government scrutiny, the individual privacy, and taken away. That's all contained on a handout, which you can pick up. This is Edith Stein, born actually the same day as von Hildebrand, October 12th, 2 years later. Jewish parents. She is a PhD at the University of Freiburg, converts to Catholic faith, teaches at Münster, and picks up where we were earlier, a friend of Baldwin Schwarz, forced to resign, and the anti-Semitism again at work. April 2nd, becomes a Carmelite nun. They flee to Holland to try to escape the Nazis, but then the Nazis go to Holland, and he's arrested and dies in gas chambers. Auschwitz, she's beatified by Pope John Paul II, and that's a story. That's a story too. Beatified in the Cathedral of Cologne. My father gets trained from Salzburg up to Cologne. A very good train service in Europe, so it's just not something in Salzburg. Cologne attends the service. The place is packed. It's a big cathedral, probably a lot bigger than St. Peter and Paul in Providence. More like St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York, but maybe even bigger than that. St. Patrick's Cathedral from the visit, it's a pretty big place. So you've got to imagine St. Patrick's Cathedral as a prototype for the cathedral in Cologne. Very big cathedral, it's packed, not an empty space. It's packed on the left side, packed on the right side, and in the middle of the pack is my father. And at the end, after the ceremony, the Pope, John Paul II, walks down the aisle, and suddenly he says, "Hello, Baldwin Schwarz." He picks out, just like I do, pick out many of you. Many of you, hello. Hello, Stephen. Hello, Stephen. Pick out somebody that I know. I found this time. So you remember him. So that's another interesting thing. Anyway, there's Vicky von Hildebrand, born October 12th, 1989, in Florence, German parents. Professor at the University of Munich, and my father comes to philosophy through him. Hitler comes to power, but even before Hitler came to power, and I outlined for you the evils of Nazism. Von Hildebrand was one of the few people, along with my father and mother also, and several other people, were one of the few people to see the evil of Nazism. For most people, they didn't see it. They didn't see it, partly because they didn't want to see it. And a strange thing, maybe, but in historical context. At the end of the First World War, Germany was flattened. Treaty of Versailles, very unjust, flattened the German nation. There was widespread unemployment and hunger, and the place was just kaput. Very, very unjust treaty. We did a much better job after the Second World War. We built them up. The Marshall Plan, much better idea. Build them up, not to level them. But you can do. If you're the victor of the war, you can level your enemies. So that Germany was leveled now. And Hitler used that. And he actually, the Nazi Party, they put people back to work. They built that car that's very famous now, the Volkswagen. They built the first interstate called the Autobahn. And they did some things that people liked. They were economically doing pretty well. And so the Nazis could appeal to them. People were working again. People had jobs. So they didn't want to look too closely. And von Hildebrand said, no, don't tell me about economics. I'm not interested. This is an evil thing. And so he spoke out against the Nazis. So much so that the Nazis got wind of it, and he was on their list. He had to leave his post at the University of Munich, his beautiful house in Munich, and he fled to Austria. Now there's a letter to the Führer, Hitler, from Franz von Papen, which the essence of that is, get this von Hildebrand. He is a troublemaker. He's causing us trouble. He was on their list. They were going to assassinate him. They weren't there yet. So he was in Austria, in Vienna, and he started a newspaper and published articles, one after the other, exposing the evil of Nazism. Those papers have now been collected in a book, which I have over here, and there's a website where you can get it, www.hildebrandlegacy.org, called My Battle Against Hitler, Dietrich von Hildebrand, put up by the von Hildebrand Legacy Foundation. And in that book, there is his memoirs, his diary, so to speak, of the events there, and then some of his essays. So he was, there's a picture. That's his death. He died. Yeah, okay, I had to face the completely uncertain future without a position and with 50 marks. It's very little money, $50 maybe. Yet it was clear to me that I could no longer teach in a National Socialist country because I was convinced I would be forced to make compromise. That's the thing. It's also why my parents left. You stay, you either work with these people, criminals, or you suffer from them. You stand up to them. And, no, I'm not going to do it. And you send you to a camp. You send you to Dachau, Auschwitz, and all those camps. That's not a very good alternative. I would rather be a beggar in freedom than to be forced into making compromises against my conscience. And so he left Germany, went to Vienna, and the newspaper, but in 1938, the Germans took over Austria. They made it part of Germany, so he had to flee. Luckily, he had a Swiss passport, a very good passport, because his grandfather had constructed a railroad for the Swiss government. They were very grateful to him, so they gave him a passport. Swiss passport is hereditary. So if you have a Swiss passport, you're lucky. You have a Swiss passport, pass it on to your kids. They can pass it on to their kids. So he had a Swiss passport, and he was able to go through various countries and finally end up in the United States. And that's a long story, which would require another evening. And if you're interested in that story, I recommend this book, Soul of a Lion, by Alice von Hildebrand. And the last part, the first part is his childhood, a very interesting childhood growing up in Florence, a very exceptional family, and 4 older sisters. It was the last one. One boy, one girl, finally a little boy is born. There he is. And he was a remarkable person right from the beginning. I can't speak highly enough of him. He deeply influenced my life, not only in philosophy, but also his love of music. And he was the most outgoing person, and constantly talking. If you drove him from here to California, he would talk the whole way. And he was just outgoing. And yet, he played beautiful music, like Beethoven quartet, for example. He would sit quietly, reverently listen. And he was a remarkable person, so many different sides. And there he is with Alice von Hildebrand, who's now 2 years old. Anyway, in this book, the first part is divided into 6 parts. The first one is his childhood, and then the university years, World War I, and then the last part is Anschluss, which is the Germans taking over Austria, and the flight, 1938 to 1940. It reads like a detective story. I mean, you can't put it down. Don't read it at night because you'll be up all night. It's just incredible how he escapes the Nazis, one step ahead. We had some close calls, my mother and I, but compared to Von Hildebrand, it's really nothing. Okay, I think that's about 818. So we did Von Hildebrand, we did Mishlei. October, he was born October 8th. All three of them were born in October. Okay. 1933, he worked to save people, thousands of people. I mean, nobody knows the number. I would Google him. It's a very interesting life. He was a wholesale grocer in a small town in central France. Saved thousands of refugees. In 1943, you'll have on it that he's part of the. He was one of the founders of French resistance. That's not on it, but it's in the handout. I have a handout. I have two handouts. One is Edith Stein and the Evil of Nazism. The other one is Von Hildebrand and Michelet. And he was one of the founders of the French resistance, very famous French resistance. Okay, he was one of the founders of that. And unfortunately, one of his fellow Frenchmen betrayed the Nazis, sent to the Nazi concentration camp, Dachau near Munich, the suburb of Munich, in prison for 18 months. Dachau is liberated, but he stays. That's the kind of person he was. He stays. It was typhus infection, typhus epidemic. He can't go as long as there are still sick people. He ministers to the sick. He is the last person to leave. 45, on the architects of dialogue and reconciliation. That's what you want to do. You don't want to continue the war. Reconciliation between France and Germany. 1946, Minister of Defense. 1959, Minister of Justice. He writes a book, so if you read French, I don't think it's translated. So if you read French, Rue de la Liberté, read Street or Avenue, maybe, Avenue of Liberty, Dachau 43 to 45, and he died in 1970. Is that concluded? That's it. Try to answer. Yes?
Were you homeschooled in French or German?
I was homeschooled in French. That was the language that I spoke at the time. So my father wanted to keep it up. If I remember correctly, I think he taught me Latin because he didn't really know we didn't know where we were going to go. We weren't going to go back to Germany, so not going to be in German. And we didn't know English. So that's a valid question. So it would have to be French. So we homeschooled me in French. And I think we started to speak Latin. Yes?
Do you see a shadow of anti-Semitism in this country currently? And is there something that we could do about it?
Is there anti-Semitism in this country? I think there is, although I tend to think that it's largely hidden. There probably are more racists among us than would let on, because it's not polite. So I think there's probably more prejudice than what you see. Because on one level, it's not politically correct, so people know what they can get away with. But they think they can't get away with it. But I think deep down, I think it's still there. I think it manifests itself in various ways, and then people are opposed to the state of Israel, and they're not ready to defend it. It's surrounded by enemies. And it's just a terrible, terrible situation. So whether that's anti-Semitism or has other roots, it may be hard to tell. But a lot of these things, like I noticed, I mentioned Joan Davis, who introduced me to Sherry, my wife. Her father was a racist. He was an out-and-out racist. He tried to prevent the marriage of his daughter to an African American. And if you ever met Jimmy, he's like my mother, the nicest person you can imagine. But there he was. I think racism is probably a bigger problem. But 27th is Father's Day. What can we do about it? I think the only thing you can do is by your example. Be a loving person. I think that's all we can do. Yes.
Steve, I think in the past, you've made the analogy of racism or anti-Semitism to a disease.
It is like a disease in the sense that you shouldn't push the analogy too far. But it is like, it's a very good point, Jim. It's like a disease in the sense that you can catch it easily. And we don't realize often enough how much our thinking is formed by our culture, for better or worse. Sometimes in good ways, but sometimes not in good ways. And so many people who are racist, I like to think of Ty Cobb, great baseball player, horrible racist. I wouldn't pick on him individually. He was surrounded by that in Georgia Peach. There was racism among the parents of the students of my father at Manhattanville College. Racism, strong racism, that didn't want African Americans to infect us. And so it's like a disease in the sense that it captures you, but it's unlike a disease in the sense that you can recognize it and say no to it, as Mother Damon did. Mother Damon saw the evil. So there are always individuals who see the wrong in their surroundings. I think one good example, historical example, is Socrates, who saw through the evil and the mistakes and the errors of his surroundings. Was courageous enough to stand up for it. I'll tell you a little story about racism. An interesting story. My father and mother were invited by students, by a student, a rich family in New Jersey. And they were very nice. And at one point, the dad of the student of my father went on to say, in the First World War, all the Jews were in the back. None of them were in the front. They were all cowards, all in the back. All the Jews were in the back. None of them were courageous enough to be in the front line. A bunch of them. And he went on and on like that. And my mother, very innocently said, it's surprising. I'm very surprised at that. She said it very softly, very loving. I'm surprised at that. Because, several of my uncles died on the front. She said it.
Yeah.
She as much as said it. Several of my uncles, they were Jewish, I'm Jewish. We were never invited again. So, that's an answer. Yes?
Did you know any other children when you came to the United States that had also left and also had to flee?
No, I was kind of alienated. I was called Frenchie by the kids at Corpus Christi School. I didn't fit in right away. I had a cape. In France, instead of with coat with sleeves. Wow, where's this guy with a cape? And some mysterious reason that cape got lost. I haven't found it again. So I asked my mother, come on, can you buy me a coat? I don't have any money. Be glad you have something to keep you warm. But I did have a few friends. I always managed to make one or two friends. I have a friend, Patrick Kennedy. But I was very close. I'm kind of, your question's leading. I was very close to my father and mother. First of all, they were very loving persons. Secondly, I was the only child. So I had my mother and father's full attention. I didn't have to compete with siblings. And thirdly, we were brought close together by the flight from the Nazis. I never played on the street before I was 8 or so. I never played on the street. It was too dangerous. So I was very close to my parents. And one day when I was in the 6th grade, 7th, 8th, 9th, my father took a Sunday journey to New Jersey, to Morristown, New Jersey. Went to this school in the countryside in Morristown, New Jersey, Delbart School. Said, this is a very nice school. You want to go to school here? Said, no. But you're going anyway. So they sent me to boarding school. It was a good thing. I needed to be weaned from my father and mother. And here's a little story of how much I needed that. My mother, as a going away present, gave me a little bar of chocolate, a Hershey bar of chocolate. This is a going away present. Oh, I treasured that. So I wasn't going to eat that right away. I mean, that's a symbol of my mother's love. So I was in a room with like 10, 12 other boys, Delbarton School, that little night table, and put my chocolate bar on the night table. My surprise, that was stuck, it was gone. Somebody actually stole it. Can you believe that? Welcome to the real world. Shows how much I needed it. Thank you, Baldwin Lady, for sending me to the Hawaii. I needed it. After 3 years, it was paid for by a friend that we had, a friend with money within the world of Astoria. Need quite a bit of money to make your apartment the world of Astoria. So they financed it. But then after a while, a little friction arose and falling out. And so they had to end Delbarton. But I probably learned my lessons that I need. From then I went to Fordham Prep, Fordham College, 2 years graduate school, and Harvard. So that was, yeah. Yes?
You mentioned earlier how people are affected by their surroundings. You presented how there are a lot of incredible people surrounding your parents and yourself. Can you speak to your faith and how it was affected by those people and other situations?
That's a hard question to answer. How is my faith affected? I see the hand of God guiding us through, first of all, giving me parents, such loving parents. Secondly, allowing us to escape Germany. My parents being among the few that saw the evil. If they hadn't seen it, we would have to stay there. And I would have been pulled into the Nazi Hitler Youth. And I didn't have my Delbarton yet. I don't think I would have made it. My father probably would have been drafted into the German army. Then what do you do? What do you do? You fight. Well, his uncle, my uncle, his younger brother, Egon, was drafted into the German army, and he was sent to France, and he just kind of pretended to play along, and then deliberately got himself captured, because he had nothing to do with the Germans. And he met a charming French farmer's daughter, and brought her back to Germany. My poor grandfather, first son married a Jewish woman. The other son marries a Polish woman who was supposed to stay within Germany, somewhat nationalistic. So one marries a Jewish woman, second one marries a Polish woman, and the third one brings back a French girl from the enemy, the French. Was my grandfather rooting for the Allies? I'm not so sure. The nationalism conflicts with other things. So he wasn't too happy, but she was so charming. She's in that picture, but you can hardly see her. But she was so charming that my grandfather's scar just dropped and erased her. It was the most wonderful. But I'll tell you a little story about her. I was visiting them, Egon and Margaret, in a home in northern Germany. He inherited the factory. My grandfather wanted my father to inherit it. My father said, no, let's study philosophy. I don't want to run a factory. The second one was a musician, right? Organist and Bach scholar, and he married a pianist. So he wasn't going to take it. So finally it ended up in Egon's lap, and he couldn't very well turn it down. So he became the head of the factory and made a pretty good living. So they invited us once. They invited me. This is before I met Cheryl. 1963, and we were there for tea. I was there, sorry, not me. I was there before I met Cherry in 1960, I met her in 1966. And suddenly, out of the blue, Margaret, the wife of Egon, my father's younger brother, says, "You want to come to Greece?" I said, yeah. I'm taking our 2 sons to Greece, and I'm inviting you. Yeah. Can you imagine being invited to Greece? All expenses paid. Started to complain. My parents and I were vacationing in northern Italy, in the Alps there, the Dolomites. Took a train and then plane to Milan. And I had the most wonderful 10 days in Greece, all expenses paid. I rented a car. I went to the Acropolis and walked where Socrates had walked before. I went to Corinth, where St. Paul preached to the Corinthians. I went to the Greek islands, Mykonos and Delos. I had an absolute wonderful day. I still remember that with fond memory. That's the kind of person she was. Out of the blue. Want to come to Greece? Yep.
Maybe one last question, and then we can wrap it up if somebody wants to do so.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be glad to talk to anyone individually, and I, in fact, want to talk to all the people I've invited to. Yes?
The Nazis would have approved same-sex marriage.
Are you ready for your upcoming show at the Ryan Center with Martin Short next week?
I don't think I can answer that. Anybody, can I have another question? Yeah.
What do you think of the current paper discussion about the culture of life and the culture of death related to our world today?
Well, there's certainly a culture of death. I don't want to get into, it gets too political. I don't want to get into that. There's certainly a culture of death in Nazi Germany. I think that's agreed upon by all sides. Is there a culture of death in America today? That gets us into divisive issues, and I would like to share that on an individual basis, but I don't want to do that.
Steve, thank you so much. Yes.